Welcome to Narratives and Nightcaps. In today's mini episode, we're talking about a specific genre, whether that's our recent reads in the genre, recommendations, or authors, whatever we feel like. And we're talking about fantasy.
This is Bree's realm right here.
I did feel like this was my time to shine.
Yes. Yes, it is. This is your time. Lay it all out there. Because I feel like all I have to offer is the ones that everybody already knows. So if you have and like the old stuff. So like if you have good, new, whatever the case may be, popular, recent, that'll be good.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about the ones I specifically picked, but if you need me to go on and on, I'm
Yes.
happy to.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, should I just dive into the fantasy genre?
Yeah,
Shall
I'm
we
really
do it?
excited to hear what you learned.
Yeah, I did a surprising amount of research because there's a lot of like I don't want to say conflicting pieces of information, but like every author or source that is out there has their own version and their own opinion. So I tried to find as much as I could that seemed A, fairly neutral, and B, comprehensible to me, because I don't need to read someone else's essay on what fantasy is.
No. Okay, hold on. Before you do though, I do have a question because I've been
Okay.
wondering this. Do would you say that you like to watch fantasy? Like, are you more likely to watch a fantasy type movie?
That's a very fair question. I feel like I could answer truthfully, yes, I'm more likely to watch than read, but I also don't feel like fantasy is necessarily even the movie genre I'm seeking out. Like, I feel like when it comes out, it's like the popular thing right now where it's like, again, part of a series, which it tends to be where you want to keep watching all of them just so that you can say, "Hey, yeah, I finished the whole trilogy," or whatever it was. But I'm not like, "Oh, what fantasy movies are out this weekend?"
I
I'm
mean,
not
I'm not that
dying
way.
to see them.
I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm that way either,
Yeah.
but I am that way about the books. But
Yes.
I was curious because I do feel like you like sort of the dystopian stuff,
Mhm.
which is not always fantasy, but I do feel like there's a connection in some cases. Like a lot of people that like dystopian tend to like fantasy too.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And I will say, like, maybe we've already touched on this. I can't remember if it was part of a recording or just a conversation we've had, but I feel like for a long time, like my family's tradition was like Black Friday, whatever movie is out, that's when we go see. And that's when I ended up seeing all of the Harry Potters or all of the Lord of the Rings or all of the Hunger Games movies, which are all kind of that fantastical, dystopian, whatever the case may be. Even like, and it's in here too, superhero, fiction and tales are like The Dark Knight and things like that is when we would go see those movies. So I do feel like to answer your question, yes, I think I'm more likely to watch it than read it.
Okay.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So definition of fantasy. So it's in literature, it will typically depict supernatural or magical features that don't exist in real life. Duh, we know that. And these features tend to be overlaid in our world as we know it. So that's where you kind of get more of that magical realism feel, like Harry Potter, where like you're in London, but then you go to Harry Potter land or whatever. It's Hogwarts. I can't even think of what it's called.
Harry Potter land.
But true fantasy, and many authors tend to gravitate toward this, is building their own world entirely. And we talked with Dave about this quite a bit in our interview with him, where like you have distinct character features, you have distinct languages, you have like your own maps, you have your own laws that all are guided around this world that you created. Fantasy is guided toward both adults and children. And this definition is from a combination of Masterclass and Wikipedia, but it's um, different from horror or science fiction, because sometimes people kind of tend to wrap those together, because it lacks a lot of the more macabre themes. So they're not, fantasy doesn't tend to be as like dark and deep and sad and scary, although it absolutely can be. Fantasy has followed various eras from Greek mythology. So think of like the Odyssey, that is technically a fantastical tale, to the Enlightenment era. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. So that's like the 1600s with the introduction of fairy tales, which tend to have more of that, like how do you get about in the world kind of thing, those just those endings to kind of like a warning in a way. And then the Victorian era with the introduction to like 1900s of The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. And then of course we have the novels and movies that we know today, so Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Twilight, so on and so forth. Okay, so according to Masterclass, which again, huge source of mine for this, because I felt like it was very neutral, as I said. But they list quite a few very important sub-genres of fantasy. Because yes, you have this whole overlay depiction of what it is, but then it can break down very specifically into different areas, as Bree knows very well. And these elements can cross into each other. So it's not like if it's one, it has to only be this one. They tend to overlap, but these are kind of the more distinct lists of them. And this is a direct copy paste, so full credit to Masterclass for letting me quote them word for word. So at the very top, at the very top of the list is high or epic fantasy. So this is set in a magical environment that has its own rules and physical laws. And then this subgenre's plots and themes have a grand scale, typically centered on a single well-developed hero or band of heroes, such as Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings. Then you move into low fantasy. So this is more set in the real world, which I think this is the kind that I tend to like better just because it seems a little more realistic. And then it's unexpected magical elements that shock characters, like plastic figurines that come to life in Indian in the Cupboard, which I have not read that book, but I have seen that movie. Then we move into magical realism. So while this is very similar to low fantasy, magical realism characters accept fantastical elements like levitation, telekinesis as a normal part of their otherwise very realistic world. So again, this is where kind of that more Harry Potter-esque comes in, or the example from Masterclass is 100 Years of Solitude, which I have not read.
Yes, you have.
I have?
Both. Yes.
Oh,
Because we read it in AP English.
Forgot about it. So we'll
yeah,
come back
honestly,
to that.
It doesn't, like, of all the books, but you have. I'm like, you have read that because we read it together.
Well, I feel like the title sounds so familiar, but nothing about it. I must have like erased it from my memory.
Honestly, fair, because there were other books that we read that really, stood strong in that they just formed such vivid memories that anything else was like, whoop.
Yeah, I think my most vivid memory was King Lear because we had to act it out.
Yeah, honestly, it's hard to forget that one. The reason I remember this one though is more so because of the cover of the book. Like I just remember what it looked like. But sorry, not to tangent. The other one I remember so well is Madame Bovary.
Yes.
Like, to me, that story is so hard to forget. So
yeah, well, and I feel like we talked for like 6 days about symbolism, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, we have enough symbolism. We're good. Okay, the next subgenre is sword and sorcery. So this is a subset of high fantasy that focuses more on sword wielding heroes, such as like Conan the Barbarian and like pulp fiction stories like that. But it also involves, again, with the sorcery element, magic or witchcraft. Then you get into dark fantasy. So this does tend to lean more horror. So it's a combination of fantasy and horror, and it aims to unnerve readers. Um, like with otherworldly monsters and things along those lines. Have you read much dark fantasy? I don't even know of a book that comes to mind that fits that depiction.
I'm picturing one, but that I haven't read, but I know of it, but I can't remember the title. I don't think I've read any real dark fantasy.
Okay.
I mean, that said, no, I don't think any of, in terms of like horror, no.
Okay. And I do think like with even high fantasy, like you have darker elements, like there's
You
always
do.
going to be the bad guy in all of the books. So I guess I'm not sure. I'm sure this kind of sublinks into those. They're interwoven, but whatever.
Probably. I feel like dark, everyone's definition of dark changes, but to
Yeah.
me, I don't know, having a horror element is pretty, like, you know what you visualize with that. And I don't think I've read anything that borders horror.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. Okay. There's only 3 left of this subgenre, is fables. So using personified animals, supernatural elements, fables tend to impart more of the moral lessons. So that's kind of that fairy tale-esque, what you kind of can learn from it, like Hansel and Gretel and things like that. And then fairy tales is also a subgenre. So this is more intended for children, typically set in distant magical worlds. Those are those beginning with Once Upon a Time, In a Land Far Away, etc. This is more of the lighthearted trolls and dragons and witches, other supernatural characters. And the example of this is like the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, which I think most people are familiar with that.
But they're actually
Then
super dark.
yeah, there's so, and that's where I feel like the fairy tale and the fable kind of commingles, because I feel like every fairy tale you still have that, what's the lesson learned from this really creepy dark thing that happened?
Well, and I think a lot of them too, and if you trace them back, they were like created because of something really horrific or
Yes,
really
like a
sad.
plague or a
Yeah,
famine.
yeah, like Hansel and Gretel, and I'm probably gonna mess this up, but I think that was actually because like kids were literally being left in the forest because families couldn't take care
Yeah.
of them. Like, it's really sad.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and even like I listened to this because My Favorite Murder, of course,
Mhm.
covers this shit. But there's like the fable of the Pied Piper, how he like led the rats and the children away from the cities. And like that's based on, I think it's like the bubonic plague or whatever, where there was that terrible rat infestation. And then all of a sudden the children disappeared. I'm guessing they died. So yeah, really horrible things, but meant to teach you a nice lesson wrapped in
Yeah,
a fairy tale package.
with a bow.
With a bow. Okay. And then the final subgenre from this masterclass list is superhero fiction. Which I guess I didn't realize this I thought maybe it was a category all of its own, but whatever. So unlike stories in which a hero acquires special abilities through specific means, these protagonists are in fact supernatural. So instead of like your Spider-Man or your Batman were like they're bit by a spider or they're like super rich, it sounds like these were heroes that already had this ability, like Superman, for example.
Okay, okay. Well, he's like from another planet.
Yeah, so like I feel like to me that's more of that supernatural fantastical element than like
Agreed.
a radioactive spider. Uh-oh, now I'm Superman or Spider-Man. Whoa. Okay. So I also wanted to dig in to fantasy versus magical realism. And tell me when to stop talking because I feel like I'm just going
I
on and
love it.
on.
I'm
Okay.
learning stuff.
Okay, good. Because I just hate hearing my voice for this long. So fantasy versus magical realism. I personally always get the two of these tangled together, which I think makes sense because they are subgenres of each other. But I thought I would make note specifically about their differences and like why you have one versus the other. So I searched through, like I told you, a ton of different articles, and I'm just really looking for the most straightforward answer that's not just someone's opinion. So I found one from it's writingclasses.com, and it's a Gotham teacher, Brandy Reisenweber. She answered this. It was posed by a student, and she answered this question. So she says, and this will be a direct quote: while magical realism situates readers in a predominant realistic world, fantasy tends to take place in an unreal world with unreal characters. Think J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings trilogy is a popular example of fantasy. The trilogy's characters include hobbits, etc. It also features a ring that bestows powers and corrupts anyone who possesses it. Fantasy tends to create different places and species, ones outside of our own world, while magical realism tends to stay grounded in reality. So I think that's the biggest difference. And that was part of the definition too. But with magical realism, I think the key word is realistic, that realism aspect where you're going to be in America or in London or whatever, and you just happen to have these magical experiences happening around you versus fantasy where you're in a totally different world. So there you have it. That's everything you need to know before diving in, or if you already love it, this is just more for you to know.
Well done.
Thank you. I just
I thought
felt
it
like
was
I was blah, 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 blah.
no, I love that you went into all of the different subgenres. I thought it was really interesting. So,
Well, and
and I
I feel like I've told you too, like whenever I'm reading something, I'm like, is this fantasy? Because I feel like it's fantasy, but you're like, no, 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 that's magical realism or
well,
whatever.
it's a subgenre of it
Yes.
though. But
Yes.
yeah, to me there is like a very like epic high fantasy is it's obvious with that like what is epic and high fantasy. To me all of the subgenres kind of get like a little bit muddy
Right.
or they
Right.
can. But I thought it was super interesting. So, and I never really thought about the superhero one before.
Yeah, that one was new because again, I thought that was kind of its own,
Its own
because you
genre.
think, right, its own genre because you have its own writing is typically comic books. So I felt like that was going to be totally different. But I can see how it has fantastical elements, especially if it's a superhero born with a power, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, for today, and it wasn't actually intentional, and then the second I put it on, I was like, this is perfect, but I am wearing my like dragon sweatshirt, which is
Yeah.
an actual book.
Nice.
I love it. Huge nerd. It's like my favorite sweatshirt. It's so good.
Yes,
Um,
girl. Well, I for our listeners, I did not put any suggestions down because all of the ones I have, people are probably very well aware of. So I wanted Bree to take it away with all of these suggestions that she might have or her favorite
well,
authors.
I feel like I'm going to be talking about some popular ones, but I kind of have to.
Yeah.
I tried to switch it up. So I have two of my like favorites, and I tried to do very different ones. So one is like epic fantasy, and then one is more magical realism, low fantasy, like very low on
Mhm.
that. And then I did my most recent one, and then I just have some other random things I can mention. And then
Okay.
if you want more, let me know.
Okay.
But I don't want to bore you.
No,
Um,
I felt like I was boring you with like, here's my spiel about fantasy.
Stop. No, I liked it. I thought it was interesting. Okay, so I'll try not to get too excited talking about these things.
No, be excited. I want our listeners to be like, yeah, fantasy.
Okay, well, I was just talking to someone about this series literally yesterday because she'd also read the whole series, and it's rare that I find people that have actually finished it. So this first series is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, who is like all the rage right now. Like if you open Bookstagram or Book Talk, you've at least seen something from her, even if you don't really realize it. Um, a lot of people are talking about ACOTAR, which is A Court of Thorns and Roses. So if you hear people say ACOTAR, that's what they're talking about. I have also read that, and I love it, and I love that people love it, and I think that that's awesome. I'm a huge Throne of Glass fan, though, like absolutely huge. Think it is, I mean, a masterpiece. So, like I love ACOTAR. It exists. here we go. Talking about Throne of Glass. So Throne of Glass is a epic fantasy. It is 7 books plus a prequel. So
Oh
it's
my
8 books
God.
total.
Holy
Yeah.
cow.
It's a commitment. Like, it's a
Yeah.
commitment. That said, it is such an incredible adventure, and I don't want to spoil any of it in case people do read it. So I'll really only talk about the beginning. There is a lot of stuff out there about like what order you should read the books in, because even though one of those 8 is a prequel, a lot of people tell you not to read it first.
Oh.
And I would be one of those. However, I would also say like you do you and just whatever feels right. But because people have very, very strong opinions about this. But I personally think that it should be read third. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is a big reveal at the end of book 2, or like supposed to be a big reveal. And then the prequel really gives you a lot of backstory into that. So it kind of keeps this like nice surprise at book 2. Whereas if you read the prequel first, you won't know about any of that.
Okay.
The prequel is pretty cool too, because it's actually like novellas all put together into one. So they're all sort of these like mini adventures, like a little series, which is
that's fun. A series within a series.
yeah, it was fun. It was actually really fun to read, and I was kind of hesitant. And I was also hesitant because after book 2, I was like, well, I've got to keep going.
Yeah.
But I would go, no, like, okay, we're gonna read this. And so Throne of Glass though starts. I have them. I brought all my books.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Ta-da! Okay.
Visuals.
Yeah. So visuals for you. Like literally no one else.
Hey, maybe a clip will pop up every now and then.
Ta-da. Okay, so this is the story of Selena, and she is this incredibly well-known assassin in a mythical, like in a fake world, a made-up world, a fiction place. So she's well-known in this country, in this city, that she is this assassin. And she was actually captured at one point and is now working as like a slave in these mines nearby. And then one day, the prince, it sends off like his people to go get her and take her out, because the king is going to have this sort of competition within the castle there. And the winner of it becomes the king's champion. And it's a way for her to really get her freedom. So she does not like the king. She does not like any of the people in power there, but this is an opportunity for her to get her freedom. So in doing so, like, she gets to know the prince, she gets to know the captain of the guard, she meets this other princess who's from a different country who's there. And there are all of these other competitors in this, but suddenly a lot of them start to die off. So like, on top of the fact that they have to battle and make it through all of these challenges, like something is also killing them.
Oh.
And you don't know what. So there's a mystery element to it as well. Everything that happens in this like first book is just wild to look back on, and when you get to the end of it and you're like, can't believe the journey that you've gone on. I don't know. The person I was talking to about it last night, we were both saying like, as soon as you finished it, you can't stop thinking about it. And even though to this day, I'll just be sitting there and thinking about the series or the last book in particular, it's really, really incredible. And it's a lot of fun to read. It's also very heartbreaking at times. There are definitely more like mature elements to it.
Okay.
Like, I think sometimes people say it's like YA, but it definitely gets not horror, but it gets dark in terms of what the characters go through. But it is an absolutely incredible story. I would just I highly, highly, highly recommend it. I know like people love ACOTAR, and I love it. Like, A Court of Mist and Fury is my comfort read. If I like, it's my comfort read. But so I have heard people say that they don't like Throne of Glass as much because they want the like romance and the smut basically, and Throne of Glass is much more about the characters and the story. Like there's still elements of relationships and romance and everything, but not to the level that ACOTAR has. And I think a lot of people, they just want that. But
Okay.
I would highly recommend. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. Even one of the girls that was saying that when she started Throne of Glass, she was like, "Well, it just doesn't have the love that I want." Like, just hang on.
Yeah. But it's kind of cool that like the same author can write like such an epic adventure-esque tale and then an epic more of that smutty romance kind
Yeah,
of tale too. So you can get there's a book out there for everyone by the same author. Great.
there is, there is. And the Sarah J. Maas. So she started writing Throne of Glass when she was like 18 years old.
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
that's like been her work for a long time.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is, so it's supposedly finished.
Oh,
However, there is certainly room for people's stories to continue, and I would love to see that happen because there are a couple of storylines that I just want them to keep going. I don't want it to
well,
end.
maybe that was on purpose. Maybe there's something in the works, like specific
Possibly.
to those storylines. So that'd be cool.
Possibly. So that's Throne of Glass. It's amazing. I want to read the whole thing again, beginning to end. It's just so good. And then also by Sarah J. Maas is A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is currently 5 books. One of them's a novella, but there's a 6th one that's supposed to be coming out somewhat in the near future. So we can look out for that. And then she also has Crescent City, which currently has 3 books, with more to come. So
Is it fair to say, because I guess I didn't put this in my definition, but does fantasy tend to be more than one novel?
yeah, a lot of the time.
Okay,
Yeah, for the most part. I'm trying to even think of like a single one where it's just, I would say epic fantasy.
right.
They like some of the other more subgenres, you can definitely have standalones, but the stories and the plot lines, they're they're so elaborate that to make it one book, I just don't know that it's really possible. It would be a massive, massive book.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking like even the ones that I've mentioned that are popular, like it's because it's a trilogy or it's because it's a series or it's yeah, like everyone knows all of the books, not just like, oh, it's just Twilight. No, it's like Twilight, an eclipse, a new moon, a new blah, blah, and all of those.
Yeah. Well, and for a lot of them too, especially in the high fantasy, your first book has so much world building in it
Mhm,
because when you write it, you can't just plop somebody there and expect them to know the rules of the world that they're
right.
reading about. So there's a lot of world building to help them understand how exactly the world operates that they're now
Mhm.
reading about. And then it can kind of pick up from there. But most of them, the characters tend to go on some sort of epic adventure, or they have multiple things they have to face. They're not going to be able to face it all in one go.
Right. Right. Okay. That's fair.
Okay.
Good.
So on the flip side of that, so Throne of Glass is a favorite. On the flip side, another favorite that I absolutely love, but I wanted to give you one that was like lighter, um, is Outlander by, and
Yes.
I'm gonna butcher her last name because I don't know how to say it, but it's Diana Gabaldon. I don't know. It's sad that I don't know that because I feel like I talk about this a lot. So this is really historical fiction with a hint of fantasy or magic. Some people say it's more sci-fi. I I guess this is my opinion. I disagree with that because there's not like technology or something like that. That
Yeah.
it is a magical element that is transporting you. It's not like time travel and that you hopped in a time travel machine. Like a magical thing happened. a lot of it is sort of like legends of the fairies and in those areas and how that transports a person to different times.
Yeah. I would
So,
say, yeah, either magical realism or even that like sorcery kind of
yeah,
element. Because
yeah,
I've seen I've watched on, I think it was on Netflix, at least the first season of it. So
the
I
whole
know,
season.
I think
You would
maybe.
know. You would
Okay,
know
then
because
maybe I haven't seen the whole season.
you would know.
But I've definitely seen, like, I know enough about it that, like, as you're talking, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I can picture, like, what happened, how she got there, like, the things that came to be because of that." So, yes, go on.
Yes, there's a magical element to it. So that is. Did I show you? This is it. Ta-da!
Oh, they're pretty. I like
I
that blue.
know. Isn't it pretty? I know these
Yeah,
are both blue,
I like it.
but it is really pretty. It is a very large book. I don't know where there's my second one. The second one is it's orange. Um, so I've talked about this book before. You already know because I've already talked to you a lot about it. But this is the story of Claire, and she is in the 1940s, which is like the present in this instance. So she's in the 1940s. She was a nurse during World War II, and she's married to another guy who was a soldier during the war. Essentially, the war has ended. They have spent like most of their marriage and their relationship apart. They're now back together and they're going on a honeymoon to Scotland. Her husband is a historian and he also has a lot of heritage. Like his family, he has connections to people that were in the Scotland area. So they go there for this little vacay. And while they are there, Claire ends up at these stones called Craignadoon, which is fake. It's not a real place. And she goes there, like they actually go out one night because they hear about these women who still go out to have some sort of ritual related to like the fairies and whatnot that they believe in this area. Um, and so they go out there. Eventually, she goes back because she still collects like herbs and plants and things like that. She has a lot of knowledge with that, with especially with her nurse's background. And while she's doing that, she hears this sound coming from the stones, and she goes and touches them and is transported to the 1700s in Scotland. And that is not like a great time to be a woman or an English woman for sure, because things are not, this is a time period when things are really brutal between the English and the Scottish. And ultimately, in a couple of years from when she like lands there, there's going to be this huge war, which really did happen between the clans and the English. And it is like going to wipe out the clans. So she is there. She's sort of taken in by this clan kind of against her will, but she also doesn't really have a choice because otherwise she's going to end up in some less than favorable hands. So she goes with them and she befriends this guy named Jamie, who is like amazing. He's just incredible. He's so good. He's such a great guy. And if you watch the show, he's got an incredible accent. And so she starts to get to know them, but she has to like pretend that all of this knowledge she has is from somewhere else. They can't know that
Mhm.
she's from the future. Otherwise, they'll think like she's a witch and she could be killed for that. It's I
Those
love
are
this.
based on, like, real feelings and real facts of what's culturally
Yes.
relevant for that time.
And that's the thing is this story really is a majority historical fiction, but
Mhm.
there is just this magical element of that time traveling through some sort of magical ability or something in that space that is magical
Mhm.
and going back and forth between time periods.
Yes. Now, and maybe you can clarify this, can she do anything because she's from the future, do anything to change the outcome of what's going to happen?
Um, so I don't want to like give it away. So that um that's part of what their goal is initially. So once she starts to get to know these Scottish people and understand them a lot more and even become like friendly with some of them, they sort of set out to try to change the future, just because their heritage, this war that's coming down the road, is going to essentially wipe that out. Like it's, and she knows that that's going to happen. She knows that a lot of people are going to die. So they sort of set out to try to change the future.
Okay.
And you'd have to read it or watch it to find out.
Yeah. Enough said about that.
Yeah. The books are great, and the show is also really great, especially seasons 1 through 3. After that, you can determine that for yourself. But I love it. You know this. I love it. I think it's fantastic. But I also like historical fiction. So
yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's the perfect mix for you because you love historical fiction as well. So like, it's not, again, super high fantasy, but if someone loves historical fiction, I feel like that could be, maybe that's a good starting point for me.
I think it is. Like, if you're someone that you kind of like, you like the real world aspect and you don't mind just this hint of it, it is really good, especially if you like historical fiction.
Yeah.
One thing, and I think I've said this before, I don't know if it was about Outlander. The only thing is, I would say it is helpful to watch an episode with hearing them with their accents and then read it, because I had an easier time reading what some of them were saying once I had heard them speak.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But so like,
Okay.
you needed to be able to like auditory visualize their accents as
And then I could easily read what they were saying.
okay. Interesting. Well, because I mean, it's supposed to be like Scottish, right? So it's a language that we're not necessarily going to know or have read before.
Like, they say some words differently, but then they also speak Gaelic.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Gaelic. Wow. Whatever it's called.
I was listening to a podcast a long time ago. I don't listen to it anymore, but one of the girls was trying to learn Gaelic, and I was like, that is not an easy one to just say,
Wow.
I'm gonna learn that language.
Is it I probably should do some research. Does that language still like, is it still spoken to this day, or is it kind of a dying language?
I don't know. I don't think a lot of people speak it, even people that live there.
I would think not. I feel like I barely have heard of it. Like, I know it existed, but I thought it was like, perhaps it is dead now.
I don't know that it's dead, but it's certainly not. There's not a whole lot of people speaking it or understanding it. But you will definitely want to go to Scotland if you read it or watch it.
I mean, I already want to go, so it'll make me want to go more.
If you want to go with me, we will definitely be going to Outlander places.
Okay.
Okay. So next, sorry, I feel like I'm talking too long, but okay.
This is a good trade-off, because I talked too long at the beginning and now it's your turn.
Now I'm going to talk too long. Okay. So my third book was just my most recent fantasy read, which is this one. It's called The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which I was like, yeah, okay, by Carissa Broadbent. So it's actually a really cool little cover. I don't think I could show it to you very well, but so I just read this one, and this is definitely an epic fantasy. I sort of like Vampire Diaries meets Hunger Games, but not with, I don't mean like the brothers with Vampire Diaries, but that's just immediately what came to mind, because this is a world of humans and vampires.
Okay.
And it's about this young woman named Araya, and she is the adopted human daughter of a vampire king. So she's not his biological daughter. That's part of the whole story, is like how she became the daughter to this very, very powerful vampire king. And she has grown up then in this world where like humans are the prey. And she lives in a castle where like she's never safe. Her dad has trained her since he brought her in, has trained her to like fight and protect herself, take care of herself, but she doesn't really want to continue she doesn't want to live that way the rest of her life. She doesn't always want to have to like watch her back because she's just a human and feels really weak in that space. So she enters this tournament that happens, I want to say it's every 100 years. Happens every 100 years. It's like coming up. She can enter this tournament, but everyone else in this tournament is going to be vampires and only one person can survive at the end. So like all the odds are against her, but you are able, if you win this tournament, you're able to make a request of the goddess who essentially hosts this tournament. And her request would, I don't want to like totally, it's not that big of a spoiler, but like her request would essentially ensure the fact that she wouldn't be this like delicate human for the rest of her life. So she enters this tournament. It's brutal and it's bloody. It's not good, but there's also a whole lot of like political things happening outside between the different vampire courts. And so she's in the midst of all of this, trying to stay healthy, trying to fight, trying to survive, despite the fact humans are like looked down upon. They're not, vampires kind of look down on them, on top of the fact that they will drink their blood and kill them. So she befriends, to like stay alive, she befriends these two vampires, including one named Rain, who is like, he's powerful and he's big, and she really like shouldn't be doing this, but she kind of gets put in a position where she needs to make an alliance. And so that's what happens. They continue to battle, and I was hooked, and I didn't think I was going to be. I don't really know why. I was just like, I kind of picked it up one day and I was like, okay, time to give this one a go.
Yeah.
And then I read it in 48 hours.
Oh my gosh. So how many books are in that series then?
Okay, so that one is, so with Araya's story, it's a duology. However, there is a third book coming out in November of this year that is, it's the same world, but it's from the point of view of a different character.
Okay, gotcha.
So her story is technically like a completed duology. There's also a prequel in this one too, which is a novella. So there are 3 out right now. I've only read the first one. I haven't finished it, but it's really good.
Good. Are you going to read the second? You think you'll pick it up?
Oh, I 100% am. I already pre-ordered it. So I'm a little bit upset because I was ready to dive right in and like keep going.
Yeah.
But they are like republishing the second one in June, and you like can't get it right now. So
I wonder why they're republishing.
It's been out for a while. Well, not a while. I mean, it's been out for like over a year, but so yeah, I'm gonna finish it. I just have to wait till freaking June 4th.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are my 3 main books because I didn't want to talk forever. But other mentions, if you want them. Well, one, I would say D.L. Jennings, who we're also going to talk to, and his trilogy completes this year in July. And his trilogy is an epic fantasy tale. I'm really liking it so far. So I would definitely recommend it with that. Rebecca Yarros she's been all the talk right now in the fantasy world.
I've seen her name come up quite a bit. Like her and Sarah J. Maas are like,
yeah,
right next to each other.
They're huge right now. So Rebecca Yarros wrote the Fourth Wing series. So if you like sort of like Game of Thrones meets also the Hunger Games and like enemies to lovers, also like politics going on, everything. It is so much. Well, the first one especially is so much fun. It's really, really, it's so good. It's really good. There are 2 right now. That series isn't completed. The third one comes out on January 25th, and I do already have it pre-ordered. I can't wait.
A year in advance. I love it.
I'm like so excited. So that's Rebecca Yarros. She has the Empyrean series. And then Rebecca Ross has a completed duology, which is Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. And I have both of them, thanks to you. Just need to read them. And so I like really want to read them. And I'm so nervous too.
Why?
Because I'm like, I feel like they're gonna just destroy me in the best of ways, and I won't come out.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, so I those Stephanie Garber is another one. She has a couple of series that are completed. One that I have is Once Upon a Broken Heart. It's a trilogy. There are 3 in that. Hers are a little bit more YA, but like
Okay.
really fun. That series specifically is kind of fairy tale-esque, with other things incorporated into it. I thought it was really beautifully written, the way that it was done. Like I liked the way that she created the world, even though I wasn't entirely convinced when I started it. But then the more I got into it, I was like, this is actually really, I don't know, it's cool. It was a different take on a fairy tale. Which I should say, that is a lot of like what fantasies are, is they're different takes on either like Greek mythology
Mhm.
or fairies or other like fairy tales. A Court of Thorns and Roses is often talked about as like a different Beauty and the Beast type of
Oh,
story.
okay.
So after that first one, it goes in an entirely different direction. But for the first one, it is often talked about that way.
Yes.
Um, Other people would include like Danielle L. Jensen as an author, Jennifer Armentrout, and V.E. Schwab. I was going to mention her because like we did read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which you liked,
I
and
did like, yes.
it does count. So V.E. Schwab as well. And
And
there are so many others.
she has a ton of, and that's where I was kind of asking about the series because I see her books, but I don't know if they're all related or if she maybe has a series and then also has like single books because like Addie LaRue is just a single novel.
Mm. It's a standalone. I haven't read any of her other stuff, but I do think she has a series.
Okay, that's what I
But
was
I would have
curious of.
to look up to confirm. So
They pop up
yeah,
on my Goodreads every now and then, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what else she has out there.
maybe you should read it since you
I
like Addie
know.
LaRue.
Perhaps, perhaps.
All right, did I totally bore you?
No, no, I love it. I think it helps to hear you say, like, combine these 2 stories and you'll get this. Like Hunger Games meets Vampire Diaries or a spinoff of whatever, because then I feel already going in, it's more relatable because everyone knows those types of stories versus like, oh my gosh. Because I think that's what I was trying to convey to you too. Like, it just is so sometimes overwhelming for me to be like, okay, what is happening? Why is it happening? Who started the war? Why is it going on? Like, I just need those. If you think of it this way, then you can interpret it this way. And I'm like, okay, that makes a lot more sense than just like you're plunked into this world and you have no idea what's going on.
And a lot of them are you're in the long game. Like,
Yeah,
so Throne of Glass, for example, you're talking about that. Like, you're like literally plopped in this world. That is essentially what happens with them. Like, you are plopped in a world and you don't know, like, how did this assassin come to be? Why is she like this? Why is
right.
she in these like why is she a slave in these salt mines right now? Who is this king? What is going on? What is happening? And you just kind of have to enjoy the ride and know
Yeah,
that like answers are coming. um a lot of them are that way.
yeah,
Is so that's why I think like magical reals, because you were saying you're like, I like the answers, and I there's less left up to interpretation in the magical. Well, that goes both ways though, because I also think that with the Night Circus, for example, I think part of that is it is intentionally left up to interpretation.
yeah, yes,
So, whereas when you have an epic or high fantasy type of story, they have to explain stuff to you.
right,
Otherwise, it literally doesn't make sense. And there's no way for people to be like, well, I think that this happened. Like they have to do it.
right.
Um, but that said, sometimes those answers come way down the road, which that part always just, I love that though, to be like 6 books in and all of a sudden you figure out this connection and how everything tied together. It to me it's so cool.
Yeah. Well, it's rewarding because you're like, "Oh my god, I get it."
Oh, it truly is. It's like it's epic. It's absolutely wild. And then you kind of disassociate from the rest of the world and
Then we don't hear from you for several months, and then you come back.
You make it back eventually, sadly, or you just reread it.
Yes. Yeah. So you can just keep getting lost in the same world over and over.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. So, yeah, that's that.
Yeah. Hey,
Um,
that's fantasy for you. We covered it.
we sure did.
I think this is our longest mini. It's supposed to be short.
Oops.
Whoops. There's a lot to go over. There's a lot that's in the fantasy genre. So
I
I'm glad
know.
we did it.
Me too. I was looking forward to this one.
Yes.
Next time our next mini ep, I should say, we are doing psychological fiction.
Yeah.
So
So I read that as depressing.
yay.
Yay.
It'll
We'll
be
be sad.
it'll maybe actually be a mini episode.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm sure we'll have a lot of
Does
books.
that include psychological thriller?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Shoot, I
Because
don't even
especially like if I'm thinking, I know you're not quite done with our current read, not even close. But if you once you read that, you'll realize there's no thriller. It's just
I know.
depressing.
I don't know that I have that many.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I mean, yeah. I think to me, I think it'll be hard to stay away from um like memoirs almost. Like that's kind of how it feels, like those sad memoirs of people who've lived through terrible shit.
All right, so depressing episode coming up.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, well, till then, cheers.
Cheers.